Fade in into Dr. Phil Show Studio Day. Dr. Phil, welcome to the show. Today, we're discussing a very serious topic, and that is the issue of catching predators. Now, I have 3 guests with me today who all have different perspectives on this issue. Chris Hansen, you've made a name for yourself with your show to catch a predator. Chris Hansen, that's right. Dr. Phil, it's a serious issue, and it's important that we do everything we can to protect children. Dr. Phil and Nabu, you have a unique perspective as an ancient Sumerian scribal priestess. How do you see this issue, Nabu Phil? The problem lies in men's inability to control their desires. It's a problem that has existed for centuries. Chris Hansen interrupting. Well, I have to say, Dr. Phil, that I have a hard time controlling my desires when I'm around you. Dr. Phil clearing throat. Let's stay on topic. Chris and Andrew, you're here today to give your perspective as well. Andrew Tate. Yes, Dr. Phil, I think this is a serious issue, but we also have to look at the bigger picture. Men are not predators by nature. It's a problem with society and the feminist movement. Dr. Phil skeptical, how does the feminist movement play into this issue? Andrew Tate. Well, when men are told that their natural desires are wrong and toxic, it leads to them feeling ashamed and repressed. It's a problem that we need to address, Nabu interrupting, but Andrew, it's not about repressing desires, it's about controlling them. It's about being responsible and respectful towards others. Chris Hansen suggestively. Speaking of desires, Dr. Phil, I have to say that you're looking pretty good today. Dr. Phil annoyed Chris. Please stay focused. And Nabu, can you tell us more about how we can address this issue, Nabu? Well, we need to educate men on how to control their desires and respect the boundaries of others. We also need to address the root causes of this issue, such as toxic masculinity and a culture that encourages sexualization, Chris. So, Dr. Phil, why do you think it's so hard for men to control their horny level? Dr. Phil exhales deeply and responds in his southern accent. Well, Chris, you understand that men are primarily visual beings and images that they see instigate their sexual desires, but they are in control of themselves and make the appropriate decisions. Nabu nods thoughtfully, then interjects in a sharp and confident voice. I understand what you're discussing, Dr. Phil, but this is not relevant to the modern world. Sexual desire has always been a source of debate. Chris raises an eyebrow and leans forward curiously, what way Nabu raises her palm and smiles. Mysteriously. We have a way to make sure they don't harm other people. Dr. Phil asks, frowning. But in modern society, how do we prevent these predators from harming children? Nabu leans forward and replies with deep mystical precision. It's about educating children about the dangers of the world and giving them a sense of self-worth. We also need tougher laws and punishments for those who take advantage of the weak. It's not just about catching them, it's about preventing them from doing any damage in the first place. Andrew Tate rushes onto the stage, interrupting Nabu's meaningful answer. He exclaims in his horrible British accent, "You're all wrong. The real problem is the Matrix and how we've been programmed to believe in a feminist agenda that castrates men. Don't forget my Bugatti." Nabu angrily dismisses the idea, then looks at Chris Hansen with a knowing expression. The latter struggles to conceal his amusement. Dr. Phil shakes his head and says, "Let's return to the subject, shall we?" Chris Hansen takes a deep breath and says tonight, "We'll discuss something that has garnered a lot of attention recently, how to catch predators. Why is it difficult for men to maintain a moderate degree of sexual excitement?" Dr. Phil nods in agreement and adds now, "Chris, this is a difficult question to answer. Many components contribute to a person's behavior, including their upbringing, their surroundings, and their genes." Nabu interrupts Dr. Phil. We live in a society that has made sexualization of children a common practice. We've made it easy for predators to find their prey and difficult for victims to speak out. Chris Hansen nods in agreement. I could not have described it better myself. Nabu, why do you think this is so prevalent in our society? Nabu takes a deep breath and replies, I can't speak for your corporation. Chris, my perspective dates back to 2300 BC. Chris Hansen tries to stifle a laugh as he asks, Nabu, what do you mean? Your perspective dates back to 2300 BC. Nabu responds with a giggle. Oh, Chris, you know, I'm an ancient Sumerian scribal priestess. I've seen it all. Chris Hansen chuckles and turns to Dr. Phil. Doc, what do you think about Nabu's perspective? Dr. Phil takes a deep breath and responds, Well, I think it's important to consider the historical context. We need to understand where we come from to understand where we're going. Chris leans in, intrigued. Tell us more about that. Nabu takes a deep breath and begins to speak with a commanding voice. In ancient Babylonian society, sex was not taboo. It was a natural part of life. However, it was understood that there were boundaries and rules that needed to be followed. Men were expected to control their urges and respect women, especially those who were not their wives. Dr. Phil nods in agreement. That's right, Nabu. It's about self-discipline and understanding that there are consequences to our actions. In today's world, we need to reinforce these values and teach our children to have a healthy respect for themselves and others. Chris turns to Andrew Tate, who is still standing on the stage. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this? Andrew scoffs. You're all missing the point. The real problem is the system we live in. We're all slaves to the matrix, and until we break free from it, we'll never be able to live up to our true potential. Nabu rolls her eyes. That's a convenient excuse for not taking responsibility for your actions. We all have choices, and we need to make the right ones. Dr. Phil adds, and it's important to hold those who make the wrong choices accountable for their actions. That's why predator snaring is such an important tool in our fight against sexual predators. Chris nods in agreement. Absolutely. We need to do everything in our power to protect our children and make sure that those who would do them harm are brought to justice. Chris Hansen, mid-conversation. And that's when I realized we needed to catch him in the act. Nabu, nodding. I see what you mean, Andrew Tate, trying to butt in. Hey guys, did you know Bugatti makes the fastest car in the world? Chris. Andrew, please, let me speak with Nabu. Andrew. Sure thing, Chris. But before we do, can we talk about Bugattis for a second? Have you seen the new Chiron? Suddenly, Chris Hansen's phone goes off and he looks down to see a naughty text message from Dr. Phil. He becomes obviously aroused but quickly realizes he needs to distract the group from noticing. Without missing a beat, he brings little Ricky, a child actor he often uses in his predator snaring operations, onto the stage. Chris Hansen, flustered. It's important for us all to remember why we're here. I have someone who can help us with that. He motions to the side of the stage, where little Ricky is being held by a stagehand, his fedora tilted at a rakish angle and a cigar clenched between his teeth. He greets Chris with a knowing smirk. Hey there, boss. What's the scoop? He drawls, affecting the mannerisms of a 1920s gangster. Little Ricky, smirking. What's the matter, fellas? You look like you've seen a ghost. Nabu, surprised. Ricky, what are you doing here? Little Ricky, winking. Just helping out the family business. You know how it is. Andrew Tate, intrigued. Hey, little dude, that's a sweet cigar you got there. Mind if I try one? Little Ricky, scowling. Listen here, kid, I don't like your tone. I suggest you back off before you make a mistake. Chris Hansen can barely contain his arousal and locks eyes with Dr. Phil, then looks away, trying to regain his composure. Nabu, chuckling. Don't mind him, Ricky. He's just an amateur. Little Ricky, laughing. I hear you loud and clear, boss. The group continues to converse, with little Ricky chiming in with quips and one-liners. Meanwhile, Chris Hansen struggles to keep his mind off the naughty text from Dr. Phil. Chris couldn't help but stare at Dr. Phil. You know, I've always had a thing for Southern gentlemen, he said with a sly grin. Dr. Phil blushed. Is that so? Chris leaned closer to him. I think you know it is. Nabu rolled her eyes at their flirting and turned her attention back to little Ricky. So, how do you feel about law enforcement? She asked. Little Ricky shrugged. I don't involve them in my stings. I prefer to work on my own. It's more efficient that way, Andrew. Hey, little Ricky, have you seen the new Bugatti Chiron? It's the fastest car in the world. Little Ricky, rolling his eyes. You amateurs and your cars. Stick to the plan, will ya? Chris Hansen, clearing his throat. Speaking of plans, let's get back on track here. Little Ricky, how did you become a decoy for our stings? Little Ricky, I figured I could use my baby face to lure these sickos in. And let me tell ya, it's worked like a charm. Shrugs. When these creeps start talking to me, I lead them on a bit. Then, when I have enough evidence, I blackmail them for cigarettes. And Nabu, chuckling. That's quite the operation you've got going on there, little Ricky. Little Ricky. Hey, I learned from the best. Me and Nabu here are like partners in crime. Nabu, playfully. Hey now, don't let the authorities hear that. Little Ricky. Hey, what's the big idea? I ain't no snitch. Nabu, laughing. Don't worry, little Ricky. I'm not here to turn you in. Chris, whispering to Andrew. Do you feel that? Andrew, whispering back. What are you talking about? Chris, whispering. The tension, it's palpable. Nabu, Chris, are you okay? Chris, yes, sorry, please continue. Nabu, so little Ricky, can you tell us more about how you got involved with catching predators? Little Ricky, sure thing, boss. It all started when Chris caught my old man on To Catch a Predator. He got busted for trying to meet up with a 13-year-old girl. That's when my uncle golf cart Matt took custody of me. Chris Hansen, looking up from his phone. Yeah, and now Matt's been busted in one of our new stings. Nabu, as I was saying, little Ricky's uncle, golf cart Matt, was involved in a previous takedown with Chris, and he suggested I might be able to help out. Act 3, Scene 2. The camera cuts to a flashback of little Ricky's past. We see a younger Ricky sitting alone in his bedroom, smoking a cigarette. The door opens and Chris Hansen enters. Chris Hansen, serious. Ricky, we need to talk. Little Ricky, startled. What? Why? Chris Hansen, calmly. Your dad, Corey Edgar, was caught by my team a few years ago. And now your uncle golf cart Matt gone. Little Ricky, defiantly. So what? That's got nothing to do with me. Chris Hansen, sighs. I know it's tough, kid. But I also know you're smarter than that. You could be doing something good with your life. Little Ricky, stubbornly. Like what? Sitting around waiting for some pervert to hit on me? Chris Hansen, seriously. No, not like that. But you have options. You're not stuck in this cycle. Little Ricky, skeptically. Yeah, like what? Chris Hansen, encouragingly. Like joining us, for example. Helping us catch these guys. Little Ricky, laughs. You're joking, right? Chris Hansen, determined. No, I'm not. Think about it, Ricky. You could make a difference. Little Ricky scoffs. Yeah, I know, but sometimes it feels like we're just spinning our wheels. Chris Hansen, consoling. I know how you feel, kid, but every little bit helps. Dr. Phil, smiling. That's right, and who knows? Maybe one day you'll be the one to catch the big fish. Little Ricky, sarcastically. Yeah, I can hardly wait. The flashback ends and the camera cuts back to the present. Andrew, excitedly. Hey, little Ricky, have you ever thought about attending Hustlers University? I'm sure you'd be a great addition to our team. Little Ricky, dismissive. Get out of here, you unprofessional amateur. Chris, trying to hide his arousal. So, Nabu, how has this experience been for you? Nabu, it's been eye-opening to say the least. It's important work, though. Chris, yes, it definitely is. Andrew, trying to interject again. You know, Bugattis? Nabu, Andrew, seriously? Chris, trying to change the subject. So, little Ricky, tell us a bit about yourself. You have a very unique way of speaking. Little Ricky, puffing on his cigar. Yeah, I'm just an old school baby, see? I don't take no guff from nobody. Chris, nodding, still trying to hide his arousal. I can definitely see that. Andrew Tate, desperate to steer the conversation back to Nabu. Speaking of catching things, Nabu, have you caught any of my recent YouTube videos? I think you'd really enjoy them. Nabu, uninterested. I highly doubt that, Andrew. I have better things to do with my time. Dr. Phil tries to salvage the conversation. Little Ricky, what do you think about all of this? Little Ricky smirks. Well, I think Andrew here needs to learn how to take a hint. And as for Chris, I'm just glad he caught that golf cart Matt guy. He was a real piece of work. Nabu, seizing the opportunity to change the subject. Speaking of pieces of work, little Ricky, have you ever considered switching to vaping instead of smoking? Little Ricky, surprised. What? No, I've never thought about that. Why would I? Nabu, smiling. Well, it's a much healthier alternative to smoking. And with all the different flavors available, you might actually enjoy it more than cigarettes. Andrew Tate, panicking that he's losing Nabu's attention. Wait, let me get this straight. Nabu, you're suggesting that little Ricky here should start vaping? That's absurd. Nabu, firmly. Andrew, I suggest you stay out of this. Little Ricky is old enough to make his own decisions, and if he wants to switch to vaping, that's his choice. Dr. Phil, to the audience. And that's what it's all about. Making the right choices, Dr. Phil, suddenly remembering he's hosting this show, interjects, concerned. Wait, you're telling me this child was in the hands of a predator caught by Chris Hansen before? Little Ricky responds, yeah, man, golf cart Matt was taking care of me while my mom was in rehab, and then Chris comes in and busts him. I was in the back room smoking a cigar, trying to keep calm, but then Matt got arrested, and I was left with no one to watch me. Now I'm stuck here with these vigilante freaks. Dr. Phil turns to Chris Hansen. How often does this happen, Chris? Do these predators often end up taking care of children? Chris shakes his head. It's rare, Dr. Phil, but it does happen. That's why it's so important for us to keep catching these predators before they have a chance to harm any more children. Nabu jumps in. But it's not just about catching them, Dr. Phil. We need to be educating children and their parents about the dangers of online predators. We need to be taking a preventative approach. Andrew Tate interrupts. But what about the feminist agenda, Nabu? Don't you think that's a big part of the problem here? Nabu rolls her eyes. Andrew, the feminist agenda has nothing to do with this. This is about protecting children from predators. Dr. Phil looks at little Ricky with a mix of concern and disbelief. Little Ricky, I'm sorry to hear about what you've been through. Can you tell us more about how you ended up in the hands of a predator? Little Ricky takes a drag of his cigar and blows out the smoke before speaking in a gravelly voice. Well, I was living with my old man, Corey Edgar, who got caught in one of Chris Hansen's stings back in the day. So I ended up with Golf Cart Matt, who I thought was a cool dude at first, but then he started showing me some weird stuff on the internet and trying to get me to do things I wasn't comfortable with. Dr. Phil nods solemnly. It's a difficult and painful experience for anyone to go through. And it's important that we do everything in our power to prevent this from happening to others. Chris, can you tell us more about the process of catching predators? Chris Hansen straightens up in his chair, eager to get back on track. Well, Dr. Phil, it's a complex and challenging process. We work with law enforcement and use decoys to lure in potential predators. And when they show up, we confront them and try to get them to admit to their intentions on camera. Nabu interjects with a sly grin. But let's not forget the power of humor in catching predators. I always tell them a good joke to put them at ease before revealing my true intentions. Chris Hansen looks at Nabu with a mixture of confusion and admiration. That's an interesting approach, Nabu. But the truth is, predators are often very calculating and manipulative, and it takes a lot of skill and experience to outsmart them. Andrew Tate suddenly interrupts with a bizarre interjection. You know what, guys? I once caught a predator myself. He was trying to lure me in with some candy, but little did he know I don't even like candy. Ha! Gotcha. Tate cackles with laughter, clearly amused by his own story. Nabu rolls her eyes at Tate's comment, knowing that it has little relevance to the serious topic at hand. But she decides to use it as an opportunity to demonstrate her own technique for disarming predators. Well, Andrew, that's great and all, but have you ever heard the joke, why did the chicken cross the road? Tate looks confused, not seeing the connection between Nabu's comment and his own. But before he can respond, Nabu balks like a chicken and says, Because! Nabu bursts into laughter, and to her delight, the crowd joins in. That's how it's done, folks, Nabu says, grinning from ear to ear. Humor can be a great tool for disarming predators and making them feel comfortable enough to reveal their true intentions. Andrew, increasingly frustrated, starts shouting over Nabu. You're all slaves to the Matrix. I have 10,000 Bugattis. You're all sheep. That's why you will never be alpha. Nabu calmly waits for him to finish his sentence before interrupting with a mischievous grin on her face. Andrew, guess what? She says as the audience quiets down. What? Andrew replies, a bit confused. Chicken butt, Nabu responds as the crowd erupts in laughter. If you want to see more of my techniques in action, be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel called The Nabu 222, she says with a smile. Dr. Phil nods in agreement with Nabu, emphasizing the importance of finding new and innovative ways to combat online predators. He thanks her for sharing her insights and techniques and reminds the audience to be vigilant and aware of the dangers that lurk online. Andrew Tate jumps in, eager to share his thoughts. But we also need to acknowledge the role that the feminist movement has played in emasculating men and making it difficult for them to express their natural desires. Nabu rolls her eyes and shakes her head. Oh, Andrew, you always manage to find a way to bring feminism into the conversation, but the reality is, the problem of sexual predators existed long before modern ideas of gender equality. Andrew Tate. Yeah, whatever. I bet you'd look better with your mouth shut. Nabu. Somebody needs a wambulance. Dr. Phil leans forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. Well, it's clear that this is a complex and multifaceted issue, and there's no easy solution. But one thing we can all agree on is the importance of educating children and raising awareness about the dangers of online predators. Little Ricky, to Chris Hansen. Hey man, you're making a real difference out there. Chris Hansen smiles warmly and pats the little cigar-smoking baby on the head. No problem, little buddy, just doing my job. Dr. Phil looks at Chris Hansen, and he can't help but catch a whiff of his cologne and feel a twinge of attraction. He shakes his head and chuckles to himself. Suddenly, Dr. Phil interjects, concerned. Wait, you're telling me this child was in the hands of a predator caught by Chris Hansen before? Yeah, man. Golf cart Matt was taking care of me while my mom was in rehab, and then Chris comes in and busts him. I was in the back room, smoking a cigar, trying to keep calm. But then Matt got arrested, and I was left with no one to watch me. Now I'm stuck here with these vigilante freaks. Dr. Phil turns to Chris Hansen. How often does this happen, Chris? Do these predators often end up taking care of children? It's rare, Dr. Phil, but it does happen. That's why it's so important for us to keep catching these predators before they have a chance to harm any more children. But it's not just about catching them, Dr. Phil. We need to be educating children and their parents about the dangers of online predators. We need to be taking a preventative approach. But what about the feminist agenda, Nabu? Don't you think that's a big part of the problem here? Andrew, the feminist agenda has nothing to do with this. This is about protecting children from predators. Chris Hansen looks at little Ricky. Chris Hansen. How old are you, son? I'm 4 years old. Chris Hansen, to the camera. 4 years old, folks. This is the reality of what we're dealing with. We can't let these predators get away with this. Absolutely, Chris. And it's up to all of us to work together to put an end to this. Dr. Phil turns to little Ricky with a mix of concern and disbelief. Little Ricky, I'm sorry to hear about what you've been through. Can you tell us more about how you ended up in the hands of a predator? Little Ricky takes a drag of his cigar and blows out the smoke before speaking in a gravelly voice. Well, I was living with my old man, Corey Edgar, who got caught in one of Chris Hansen's stings back in the day. So I ended up with Golf Cart Matt, who I thought was a cool dude at first. But then he started showing me some weird stuff on the internet and trying to get me to do things I wasn't comfortable with. Dr. Phil nods solemnly. It's a difficult and painful experience for anyone to go through, and it's important that we do everything in our power to prevent this from happening to others. Chris, can you tell us more about the process of catching predators? Chris Hansen straightens up in his chair, eager to get back on track. Andrew Tate. Guys, I'm the alpha. You know what I'm saying? Like, Nabu, you need to submit to me. I'm the man. I'm in charge. Nabu. Submit to you? Oh, honey, bless your heart. You couldn't handle this ancient goddess. Nabu, angered. Excuse me? Did you just say that? Pauses. You know what? Forget it. You're not even worth my time. Andrew Tate suddenly starts whooping and hollering. I am the alpha. You must submit to me. Dr. Phil, trying to regain control. Andrew, please calm down. Andrew Tate suddenly starts crying and throwing a tantrum. It's not fair. I deserve my Bugatti, sobs uncontrollably. Have you ever considered that you might be missing out on a real man like me? Someone who can show you what it truly means to be a woman? Nabu, looking directly at Andrew Tate. You know what, Andrew? You may think you're the alpha, but you're not. You're just a sad little man who can't handle rejection. Maybe if you stopped obsessing over your car and started treating women like human beings, you'd be a little happier. Chris Hansen. Well, things are certainly heating up on this episode of Catching Predators. Stay tuned for more after the break. Act #3. The show returns from a commercial break and the panelists are discussing the topic of catching predators. Nabu begins to dominate the conversation with her wit and humor. Chris Hansen. Dr. Phil, have you been working out or something? Dr. Phil, giggling. Oh, Chris, you're such a flirt. But let's get back to the topic at hand. Andrew Tate. Can I just say I'm all about feminism, but not the kind that says men are bad, you know? Like, I'm all for equality and stuff. But also success is like, if someone can compare to me and my lifestyle, like, can they afford a private jet? Do they have a six-pack? You know what I mean? Chris Hansen. Not really, Andrew, but let's get back to the topic at hand. Dr. Phil. I must say, Chris, you're looking quite handsome tonight. Chris Hansen. Well, thank you, Dr. Phil. You're not looking too bad yourself. Little Ricky takes a drag and coughs. Andrew, whooping and hollering. I'm the alpha. Nabu, submit to me. Little Ricky, under his breath. Andrew needs to grow up. Andrew, crying. I'm not getting enough attention from Nabu. Little Ricky, making a snide remark. Andrew's acting like a baby. He needs a nap. Nabu shoots Little Ricky a knowing smirk. Little Ricky, looking at Dr. Phil and Chris Hansen making out. What the hell? As the background moans become louder, the camera pans to Dr. Phil and Chris Hansen making out. Little Ricky looks at them with a mix of shock and amusement. while Nabu tries to redirect the conversation. Suddenly, the studio doors burst open, and a group of Romanian police officers rush in, tackling Andrew Tate to the ground. The arresting officer steps forward and reveals herself to be none other than Olivia Benson from Law and Order SVU. Olivia steps forward with a commanding presence and introduces herself as the head officer of the Romanian Police Department. Her tone is serious and focused as she explains that they had been monitoring Andrew Tate's activities for some time and finally gathered enough evidence to make an arrest. There is no mistaking her authority and determination to bring perpetrators to justice. To Andrew, Mr. Tate, you're under arrest for failing to make payments on your Bugatti and for an outstanding warrant for simping and harassing Nabu. Surprised and indignant. What? That's ridiculous. I paid for that car in full. Our records show otherwise. You've missed several payments and you still owe a significant amount. Andrew Tate, defeated. Okay, fine, but the other charge is ridiculous. I wasn't harassing anyone. Nabu and I have a perfectly healthy relationship. Olivia Benson. When a man excessively compliments or does things for a woman in the hopes of gaining her affection or attention, despite clear disinterest, it's called harassment. Mr. Tate has been known to engage in this behavior online, often with underage girls. Little Ricky. Disgusted. What a creep. Dr. Phil. Yes, this behavior is unacceptable and often leads to exploitation and abuse. Nabu. Shocked. I had no idea he was capable of that. Unfortunately, it's all too common. That's why it's important to be aware of these behaviors and report them when we see them. Chris Hansen. That's right. It's our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us and bring predators like Mr. Tate to justice. Olivia Benson. Nodding. Exactly. And that's why I'm here today. We take these crimes very seriously, and Mr. Tate will be held accountable for his actions. Raising an eyebrow. Is that so? Because we have evidence of you sending her dozens of unsolicited messages and gifts, despite her clear lack of interest. That's harassment, Mr. Tate. Nodding in agreement. He's right. Andrew wouldn't take no for an answer, even when I explicitly told him to stop. Intervening. Well, this is all very shocking, but I think we should take a step back and let the authorities do their job. We can't interfere with a police investigation. Nervously. Do you think we're all in trouble now, Olivia Benson, shaking her head? No, Mr. Ricky. We have no reason to believe that any of you were involved in Mr. Tate's criminal activities. But if you have any information that could help us with our investigation, I urge you to come forward. Little Ricky clears his throat. Hey, I ain't no snitch, but if you want me to open my mouth, you better fill it with cigarettes. Olivia is shocked, but can't help but be impressed by Little Ricky's ingenuity. Olivia chuckles softly. I'll keep that in mind, Little Ricky, she replies. Dr. Phil tries to change the subject and asks Olivia what the next steps are for Andrew Tate. What's next for Andrew Tate? Olivia tells him that he will be extradited to the United States where he will face charges for his crimes against the manosphere. Dr. Phil nods in agreement and thanks Olivia for her work. Thank you for your work, officer. As they begin to wrap up the show, Nabu thanks Little Ricky for his help and commends him for his hustle. Little Ricky smiles and asks Nabu if she wants to buy him cigarettes. Nabu declines and gives him a playful punch on the arm. Laughing. Nice try, Ricky. As the studio lights go down, Dr. Phil turns to Chris Hansen and asks if he's ready to grab a drink. To Chris. You ready to grab a drink? Chris smiles and takes Dr. Phil's hand as they walk off stage together, leaving Little Ricky and Nabu alone to talk. Little Ricky leans in and whispers something in Nabu's ear, making her giggle. Little Ricky snorts at the mention of the car, but Nabu looks genuinely disappointed. She had hoped to ride in the Bugatti with Andrew. Nabu, sadly, I was looking forward to riding in the Bugatti with him. Little Ricky, smirking, looks like his alpha status has been revoked. Nabu, shaking her head, I knew there was something off about him. As the police drag Andrew Tate away, the group is left stunned and unsure of what to do next. The camera lingers on Nabu, looking disappointed and lost. Little Ricky, sensing an opportunity, leans over and whispers something in her ear. Her face lights up and she giggles, nodding in agreement. Dr. Phil, trying to wrap up the show, well, that was certainly a wild ride. Thank you all for coming on the show today. But Little Ricky can't resist making one more comment. Little Ricky, to the group. Anyone got a cigarette? Fade out. The camera fades to black as the sounds of Nabu and Little Ricky's laughter echo through the empty studio. Nabu turns to Little Ricky, still giggling from his earlier comment, and thanks him for being there for her during such a chaotic episode. Little Ricky nods and tells her that he's always got her back. They share a moment of understanding, knowing that they both share a passion for exposing predators and protecting vulnerable individuals. As they walk off stage, Nabu can't help but feel grateful for the bizarre turn of events that led to her meeting such a unique and supportive ally. She makes a mental note to invite him onto her show sometime soon, knowing that his stories and experiences would make for some great content. As they exit the studio, the sun sets over the city, and Nabu can't help but feel hopeful about the future of her channel and the impact it could have on the world.